scratched my head and couldn't think of anything interesting, so I decided to put that on. Okay. Basically, starting off, I'm Gerry. I'm from the Sea Lab downstairs, where we look at sensor electromagnetics and acoustics. And well, many of you might recognise this amazing photo of the Apollo 15 lunar rover. So many of you will have heard the line, the cheesy line, "Space, the final frontier." As we all know, in the late 20th century, engineers all over the world spent huge amounts of money and time trying to take part in the space race to try and get up there, because we knew very little about the far side of our moon, about anything else outside of our own Earth, really. So we spent huge amounts of money trying to get there. Now we've got there, we're not really that interested anymore. There's a big amount of dirt, there's nothing really up there, so a lot of the money's starting to not be spent as much. However, from my point of view, in this presentation, I'm actually going to rename the cheesy line to "Subsea, the final frontier." As you can see from this brilliant photo, actually the Earth is actually covered by approximately 71% of our Earth is actually water. So, and what very few people know is we actually know more about the dark side of the moon, and I'm not talking about the dodgy Pink Floyd album, and the surface of Mars, than we do about our actual what's below our surface of our water ourselves. As we're starting to explore the deep ocean, we're starting to discover a massive proportion of wildlife actually living under the sea that we never knew about. They actually reckon that 80% of all wildlife on the planet actually resides underneath the sea, and we've only investigated about 5% of that. So, why do we honestly care about what's underneath our sea? What's the big thing in there for us? Why do we want to know? Well, apart from it being a general trait of the human race to discover more and more and just generally be nosy, there's also a lot of commercial and scientific interest in what's actually underneath the sea. Ranging from our exploration for more fossil fuels, the locating and commissioning of renewable energy sources, the need for better methods of predicting climate change and weather forecasts, and the need to understand the bigger picture of what's actually going on in our own planet. I'm going to cover a few slides of actually some of the reasons we might be interested, and in the long term how that can help us. Firstly, a huge amount of work is going on in marine science to actually discover what's going on in the natural environment subsea. There's things underneath the depth where we're now getting down to thousands of feet down that previously we could only have ever imagined. We're starting to discover wildlife, so up on these slides there's some examples of jellyfish. So that's the comb jellyfish, which is taken using a bioluminescent camera, so you can see how its bioluminescent shape is used to try and scare off other creatures and to attract prey. And these images were taken just thousands of feet down, and they hadn't seen them before. This is actually an example of a deep ocean shrimp trying to use a bioluminescent spray to try and blind the fish that's trying to eat it and scare it off so it can get away. The thing is, we're starting to find out things underneath the water that we never knew about, and we're only starting to hit the sort of tip of the iceberg. Also, looking in shallow water, I don't know if any of you look at TED Talks, you might have seen some of these videos before by a guy called David Gallo. This is a video by Roger Hanlon from the Marine Biology Labs. If you actually look at that, that just looks like a rock, but as we're now starting to have more technology to actually start looking at things for longer periods of time, this video is actually showing, if you look at the rock and when the video plays, we're starting to find creatures that we never knew could do things like they had before. So this is an example of camouflaging techniques on an octopus. So you thought it was a rock, there's actually an octopus in there that's actually blended in with the texture behind it. So that shows the example of how an octopus can imitate the texture, the colour, the shape of the material behind it. And obviously when it's realised it's caught, it spreads itself out nice and wide to try and scare off the predators. So it just plays it in slow motion again there in reverse. So you can see how it goes from bright white, its natural colour, and we'll just blend in slowly to match the texture and shape of what's behind it.
Wow, that's really cool. Can't see any difference.
Cool. Another major need that's currently going on for why we're wanting to go out in the sea is as our developing world is starting to need more and more energy, we're starting to run out of natural resources like oil and gas. And we're finding that actually most of our resources are now right out in the deep ocean. So to get there, we're having to go places where humans physically couldn't go. So we're having the need for underwater technology to go under there. This video here is actually, if you can all remember back in 2010, the Gulf of Mexico leak. This is an ROV that they used to try and stem a leak, so the quality's not very good, but you can see up here the bubbles that the oil try to leak out of the well, and this ROV goes in and tries to stem the leak from to stop the oil getting out. So along with this and oil and gas, there's also a big push to try and do renewable technology. A lot of that is going to be in the future, I suspect, to do with tidal turbines and also offshore wind farms. With those sort of things, there's obviously a need to monitor the wind farms where you're going to need communications, but also a method of being able to lay the long pipelines and making sure where they are. So, one quick final one, a bit close to home. I don't know if any of you heard of this, the Nautilus minerals. There's a company who are currently trying to mine about 1 kilometre underneath the ground some of the underwater volcanoes, where they're trying to actually pick up copper and gold deposits and send them back to the surface. So this is a machine that's actually been built down on the River Tyne by a company called SMP. If you actually look at the actual scale, this is a human being, so you're talking about the sort of the height of a house almost, and they're going to sink that down 1 kilometre deep to try and pick up gold and copper that we couldn't get otherwise. So I told you all this. If it's that important, why don't we just do it? What's so complicated about it? Well, actually, there's the problem with not just sticking something down there is a lot of the things that we take for granted at the moment, like our mobile phones and our GPS and radar, just actually wouldn't work down there. The main reason for that is seawater is a really good conductor, so you can't actually propagate electromagnetic signals through the water. So that means that we don't really have any idea where we are, who we're talking to, what's going on, and what's around us. So we effectively can't stick one of those machines down there and go and drill that over there, because we don't actually know where it is. It could be anywhere underwater. So we can only actually, using electromagnetic signals, only transmit sort of a couple of centimetres, so that's totally useless. Other complications, if you actually think about the pressure rating of something, every 10 metres down we go, there's a difference of 1 bar of pressure. So when you start getting down into 11 kilometres of depth, where the Mariana Trench is, you're starting to get sort of 1,100 bars worth of pressure. That's just going to crush anything. You try building something that can withstand that. Compared to the surface of the moon, it's actually a lot bigger a challenge to get something that deep compared to getting up into space. Also, the visibility down there, if you think about the North Sea or brackish water, it's obviously going to be really murky. You can't see anything. You don't know what's going on around you. And even in nice clear water like that, if you get several metres down, you're not going to see anything anyway. It's going to be too dark. So what's the solution? How are we going to overcome this? Well, we start looking at using underwater acoustic techniques. This is actually a technique that we borrowed off the natural environment. If you take a snippet of listening in the sort of the sea, you can start to hear whale and dolphin song where they're communicating and navigating with each other. We're only just sort of trying to get a little bit of what they're trying to do. Some whales can actually hear thousands of miles away and see what's going on around them using their really high quality sonar. The reason audio signals are great is they can travel miles, and they're not really affected by the turbidity of the water, or whether it's salt water, fresh water, or anything like that. We can still propagate through it. There are some complications with acoustics. We start getting multipath, which you'll get in your EM channels from things bouncing off walls and things like that. But because the speed of sound's so slow, the actual length of the delay is so long that we're trying to get rid of delays that are sort of several symbols on from where we already are. Also, the channel's so time varying. If you think about if the vehicle's moving around and the sea's moving around, then obviously that signal's going to be majorly corrupted in time. Also, Doppler shift. I'm going to use a really cheesy video to explain this one. I don't know if any of you watch the Big Bang Theory, but I want to go work. Maybe not.
Wave caused by relative motion between the source of the wave and the observer.
We'll go back.
Hey, what's Sheldon supposed to be?
Oh, he's the Doppler effect. Yes. It's the apparent change in the frequency of a wave caused by relative motion between the source of the wave and the observer.
Oh, sure, I see it now, the Doppler effect.
So to quote a really geeky man, it's the actual effect of two things moving which will compress or expand a wave. So obviously we need to make a method of compensating for that. If you were talking about in a sort of air environment, like an electromagnetic environment, if we took the worst case example, of two planes heading directly towards each other, try to transmit to tell each other which way to go, then your fractional Doppler shift is going tiny, 10 to the minus 6. Whereas if you were to have a look at this for sort of an underwater vehicle like an ROV that we use regularly, because the speed of sound is so much slower, it's 200,000 times slower, your Doppler shift is actually going to be much larger. It's still only a thousandth of the packet, but if you think of that increasing and decreasing, you've got to come up with a way of compensating that. So, solutions to the problems. Current research is actually looking at ways to overcome these problems of navigating, communicating, and imaging. So some of these products have been developed in actually the building here. The one in the bottom is actually a USBL system where you can actually track and locate something like a vehicle or a diver, and that works very similarly to GPS where we triangulate its location. Also an acoustic modem, so this was developed by Mr. Nishimoto there, who you can actually transmit several kilometres with sort of several high data rates there. So you can actually stick one of them on something. They've been applied where something like a wind farm or a tidal turbine, where you can mount it on it and get feedback back to the shore through the water. And the final one is sonar. So we can actually now start to see things using a sonar image by scanning using a sonar like this. Just to show you a quick example, just to finish off with. So that sonar that we showed there is called a starfish sonar, which is developed by a company we do some work with. This image you guys might have seen quite a few times before, so this is the Tyne Bridge and the quayside. And underneath here is obviously where you wouldn't be able to see, that's where the water stops. Now, if you drive a boat along there with a side scan sonar underneath, you can start to actually overlay an image underneath it, like that, so you can actually start to see things you never would have done before. So this is obviously what you can see and this is what you can't, so you can see even details like the ladder coming down here, things like that. And they've done that again, so you can start doing it sort of, so that's one of the ship's works down the river, and you can start to look at the dock and see where the dock's sort of falling apart, and then you can work out where you're going to do work. So anyway, so that's why I think that subsea is the next area of work and where people are having, where we're limited at the moment. So if any of you have any questions, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Gerry. Anyone? Questions?
Biological question. So there's creatures who live very deep
Yeah.
under the sea. Can they live actually above somewhere?
I guess they probably could. I'm not a marine biologist, so I don't know for definite.
I mean, they live there because
I guess it's got everything
they
they
have
need.
more freedom there.
Yeah, so I guess it's their natural environment.
Presumably those who live here, they can't live down there. But so I'm wondering whether those can live
yeah, a
the
lot
other
of
way
the
around.
reason the fish up here can't go down is obviously the pressure difference.
Pressure, yeah. But those can live in high pressure.
Yeah.
Can they live in low pressure?
Well, I mean, because they don't need light and they don't need sort of all the things that maybe some of the things do higher on the surface, I guess they don't have a need to come any higher anyway.
But can they survive
I guess
when they go? If you take
I wouldn't know personally.
Right.
Sorry, that's not
I
my.
think those really deep sea fish tend to die if you go over
Is it? For what reason?
because they're pressure compensating for
Really?
death.
So they just
Designed to live their whole
explode
life down there.
Anything else?
Not so much of a question, but a comment. There was a thing on telly last night about Richard Hammond's Miracles of Nature,
Right.
and they showed a cuttlefish doing exactly the same.
Right.
They put it in an artificial environment with stripes and a chessboard,
Ah,
and had a very good attempt at trying to mimic what it was doing.
Yeah. I think it's quite impressive about how things that we never really knew existed previously can actually do amazing things, such as blending into the pasta.
Okay. Thank you, Gerry.
Cheers. Thank you.